How to win any argument. We all find ourselves in arguments, whether it's with a colleague, a friend, a loved one, or even a complete stranger. And while it's easy to think that winning an argument is about speaking louder, being more persistent, or overwhelming the other person with facts, the truth is much deeper and more profound than that. Winning an argument isn't just about getting your point across. It's about understanding the other person, mastering your emotions, and knowing how to navigate the conversation to your advantage. The first thing you need to understand is that arguments are not about defeating the other person. They are about understanding, persuading, and creating a path to mutual resolution. It's not about winning for the sake of ego, but about gaining ground in the conversation, making your point clear, and moving towards something more constructive. The moment you make it personal, the moment you start fighting to prove your superiority, you lose the essence of a true debate. Now, let's look at the first fundamental truth of argumentation. Control your emotions. You've seen it. People who get emotional in arguments, who raise their voice, start flailing their arms around, or lose their calm altogether. The thing is, the moment you lose control of your emotions, you've already lost the battle. Arguments are not about who yells the loudest or who gets angriest. They're about who can stay calm and composed, who can stand their ground with clarity. When emotions take over, logic is lost. Think about it. When someone yells at you, do you really hear their argument? Or do you start focusing on how they're making you feel? The goal is not to make the other person react emotionally, but to make them think. If you let your emotions dictate your words, you'll only cloud your message and make the situation worse. Imagine you're arguing with someone who disagrees with you about a sensitive issue. You could feel your anger rising, your heart racing, and your frustration building. But if you step back for just a second, take a deep breath, let the moment pass, suddenly the situation doesn't feel as dangerous. You regain control of the conversation, your words become more measured, and your arguments become more compelling. When you stay calm, when you keep your emotions in check, you're not only in control of yourself, you're in control of the entire exchange. People are more likely to listen to you when they see that you're calm, composed, and rational. Emotions may trigger reactions, but logic triggers respect. The second key point is to listen. You might be surprised to hear this, but the most important part of winning any argument is not speaking. It's listening. When you listen to the other person, you're doing more than just hearing their words. You're understanding their perspective, their fears, and their logic. This is crucial because without understanding their side, you can't effectively respond. Too many times, we get so caught up in formulating our next point or preparing to defend ourselves that we forget to truly listen. We're not paying attention to what they're saying. We're only thinking about what we're going to say next. But listening is where the magic happens. When you actively listen, you gain insight into their weaknesses, their emotional triggers, and even their underlying concerns. Think about the last argument you were in. Was there a moment when you didn't fully hear the other person? Did you just wait for them to finish so you could launch into your next point? How often do we get distracted by our own beliefs and miss the most important piece of information the other person is offering? True listening is the key to opening up the conversation and finding the common ground that will eventually lead to resolution. By listening carefully, you're also signaling to the other person that you value their point of view. This alone will make them more likely to hear you out when it's your turn to speak. Listening is not just a tactic for winning. It's a strategy for building understanding and trust. Now let's talk about the art of timing. Timing is everything in an argument. It's about knowing when to speak and when to remain silent. In a heated debate, there's always a natural rhythm to the conversation. There are pauses, moments when both sides are gathering their thoughts, when things slow down enough for the next move to be made. This is where the real skill comes in, knowing when to strike and knowing when to hold back. When you're speaking, keep it concise. Say what you need to say, but don't overwhelm your listener with information. Too much information in an argument is like throwing 100 different facts at someone without giving them time to process. It's like watching someone try to catch raindrops with their hands. It's simply too much to handle at once. Instead, take a moment. Let your words sink in. Let your points resonate. On the other hand, there are moments when you need to let the silence speak for you. A well-timed pause can be incredibly powerful. It creates space for reflection and shows the other person that you're confident enough in your position to wait for them to think it through. In the silence, your argument gains weight. It's like planting a seed in their mind and giving it time to grow. When you time your words and silences correctly, you become more persuasive. You're not just talking at the other person. You're allowing them to digest your arguments and engage with you more deeply. It's like creating a rhythm in the debate where you're both dancing to the same beat. How to win any argument. Continued. Now that we've covered the basics of emotional control, listening, and timing, let's dive deeper into another essential element of winning arguments: understanding the power of silence. Silence is one of the most underrated tools in any argument. It may seem like an uncomfortable void, a gap in the conversation that we're eager to fill with words. But the truth is, silence can be more powerful than any argument you can make with words alone. When you're in the middle of a heated exchange, the silence creates a space for reflection. It gives both sides the opportunity to process what's being said, without the pressure of needing to respond immediately. Think about it. When someone pauses before answering, it often makes their response more meaningful. It shows that they've considered your words carefully. The same applies to you. When you give a pause before speaking, you show that you're not just reacting impulsively. You're being deliberate and thoughtful in your response. Using silence strategically shifts the power dynamic in the conversation. It gives you the upper hand. It allows you to control the pace and the flow of the exchange. Silence forces the other person to think, to reconsider their position. People often feel uncomfortable with silence, so when you use it, you make them uncomfortable in a way that works to your advantage. It's a subtle but highly effective method of gaining control without uttering a word. But how do you use silence effectively? It's all about knowing when to speak and when to pause. After making a point, don't rush into the next argument. Let your words settle. Let the other person digest what you've said. Then, when they try to speak, don't jump in immediately. Let them process their thoughts. This pause creates a deeper level of engagement, one where both sides are more likely to hear each other clearly. Next, we must address a critical piece of argumentation: the art of asking the right questions. When you ask someone a question, you're not just seeking an answer. You're guiding the conversation. Questions have the power to lead people down a path of self-discovery, to open their eyes to perspectives they may have overlooked. A well-placed question can dismantle an argument, exposing flaws in reasoning or forcing the other person to confront their assumptions. Here's the key: ask open-ended questions. These questions invite deeper thought and encourage the other person to explain their reasoning. For example, instead of saying, "Why do you think that's right?" you could say, "What makes you believe that's the best solution?" This invites a more thoughtful response, one that's harder to dismiss. By asking questions, you're not just trying to prove a point. You're trying to lead the other person to a realization. You want them to think critically about their position, and a well-posed question is the perfect way to make that happen. It forces them to explain their logic, which can often lead to the unraveling of their argument. But you must be strategic with your questions. If you ask questions in a way that's aggressive or confrontational, you risk pushing the other person into a defensive mode. The goal isn't to trap them, but to guide them to a more honest understanding. This requires subtlety. Your question should feel like a gentle challenge, not an attack. One more vital point to consider in any argument: the importance of body language. Words are powerful, but nonverbal communication is often even more telling. Your posture, your gestures, your facial expressions, all of these things communicate far more than you might realize. In an argument, your body language can either strengthen or undermine your position. If you stand tall, with your shoulders back and your gaze steady, you communicate confidence. Confidence is magnetic. It draws people in, makes them more likely to respect your opinion. If you slouch, cross your arms, or look down, you send the message that you're unsure of yourself, even if your words say otherwise. Your gestures matter too. If you use open, deliberate gestures, you're more likely to appear approachable and reasonable. If you point aggressively, you create an adversarial tone that can escalate the argument. Small movements, like nodding or leaning slightly forward, convey attentiveness and engagement. signaling that you're listening and actively participating in the conversation. The best argumenters know how to match their words with their body language. They know that the message they're sending with their posture is just as important as the message they're sending with their words. When you align both, you create a powerful, persuasive presence that's hard to ignore. Now let's talk about the psychological tactics that can turn an argument in your favor. One key psychological principle to keep in mind is the concept of anchoring. In simple terms, anchoring is the human tendency to rely heavily on the first piece of information we hear when making decisions. This initial piece of information is known as the anchor, and it tends to influence everything that follows. If you set the right anchor in an argument, you control the direction of the entire conversation. For example, let's say you're arguing with someone about a product's price. The first price you mention, even if it's exaggerated, will set the anchor. If you then follow up with a more reasonable price, it will seem much more acceptable because it's seen in contrast to the initial anchor. The key here is to start strong, with a solid foundation of facts or perspectives that will guide the entire argument. The anchor is the base from which everything else will fall into place. How to win any argument, continued. Now that we've discussed emotional control, listening, timing, and psychological tactics, let's talk about strategies to keep the argument constructive. After all, the goal is not just to win for the sake of winning, but to create an outcome that benefits both sides in the long run. In many arguments, especially those with loved ones, colleagues, or friends, it's easy to get caught up in the heat of the moment and forget the bigger picture. So, how do we maintain perspective when emotions are running high? First and foremost, remember that the argument is a conversation, not a battle. When you start treating it like a battle, you're already setting yourself up for a conflict that could end in both sides losing. Instead, think of it as a discussion, a shared exploration of different perspectives. In a discussion, the goal is to listen, understand, and find a solution, not to destroy the other person's point of view. This shift in mindset can completely change the tone of the argument. When you approach it as a conversation, you're much more likely to be open to compromise, to hear the other person out, and to find common ground. This isn't weakness. This is strength. It takes strength to open yourself up to new ideas, especially when they challenge your own. A great tactic for maintaining a constructive tone is to use the yes and the approach. Instead of jumping into disagreement or opposition right away, begin by acknowledging the validity of the other person's perspective, and then add your point. For example, if someone argues that we need stricter laws to prevent crime, instead of saying, "I don't agree with you at all," try, "Yes, I agree that crime is a major issue, and I think we can address it in other ways too, like community programs." This approach validates the other person's thoughts and feelings, but it also allows you to introduce your own ideas without shutting down the conversation. It opens up space for dialogue instead of division. It's about building bridges, not walls. And then, don't be afraid to apologize when necessary. Apologies in arguments don't make you weak, they make you strong. The ability to admit when you've said something hurtful or when you've been wrong is an indication of maturity and emotional intelligence. It shows the other person that you're more interested in the relationship than in winning the argument. It also disarms them, creating an atmosphere of trust and respect where both sides can feel heard. Remember that the most powerful arguments are not the ones where you defeat the other person, but the ones where you both walk away with a better understanding of each other. When both parties feel respected, even if the argument hasn't been fully resolved, there's an underlying foundation of goodwill that can be built upon later. In any argument, words are weapons, but how you wield those weapons determines the outcome. If you throw words around carelessly, you'll end up with wounds that last long after the argument has ended. But if you choose your words wisely, if you aim them with precision and purpose, you can win not just the argument, but also the respect of the other person. Finally, as we've mentioned, winning an argument doesn't mean getting the last word. It means making your point, staying true to your values, and maintaining your integrity throughout the exchange. It means being able to walk away knowing that you held your ground, but also that you didn't allow the argument to control you. When you maintain control of the conversation, you win, not by defeating someone else, but by mastering yourself. When the conversation ends, the true victory is in how you feel about it. Did you feel like you acted with honor? Did you listen carefully, speak with clarity, and maintain your composure? If you can answer yes to all of these questions, then you've already won. Not ground over someone else, but ground over yourself, your emotions, your fears, and your ego. When you can control all of that, you can win any argument. For example, let's say you're arguing with someone about a product's price. The first price you mention, even if it's exaggerated, will set the anchor.